All right, now let's look at the same period, but focusing on the theme of secularization of city life and religious architecture, which is also a kind of a turning point in the development of Chinese architecture during this very important period. So we will have a few lectures on this period. Just after the midterm, the first lecture after the midterm is also primarily focusing on this period. We will focus on the architectural technique, architectural technology of timber construction, focusing on the book of 营造法式. So that is also this period. So this period is a very important period in terms of the development of Northern and Southern tradition, the secularization of urban life, and religious architecture. We know that in the Tang Dynasty, the capital city, which is in Chang'an here, the city had a night curfew every day because each block, known as wards, were gated and walled, and the gate lock at night. The Song capital city in Kaifeng, which is here on the slightly to the east of the Chang'an, this is the Song capital. The city was much more secularized, much more open, much more commercial. These are the comparison of the two capitals. We looked at the city of Chang'an in the previous lectures. We know that the city of Chang'an is head model. And the city of Kaifeng, which is known as Bianliang during the Northern Song period, the eastern capital, Bianliang, is a kind of heart model capital city. So this is the palace city. This is the inner city, and this is the outer city, right? The bordering wall of Bianliang had not been specifically located yet, because the city is under the current modern city. So archaeological excavation was not systematically carried out. So that boundary is not scientifically accurate, right? So it's pretty much postulated. It's a more kind of imagined, that the general border is somewhere there, but maybe not that exactly in that shape and on that location. But the city is clearly a heart model based on both archaeological excavation and textual record. Now let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons for the head model and heart model. The benefit of one of the benefit of the head model is that the ruler in the palace had direct access to the exterior of the city, right? So it's not surrounded by the whole city. The rulers have access both to the city and to the suburb. While in the heart model, the capital, the rulers live among their people, right? It does not have direct access to the to the suburb, to the outside areas of the capital. So on one hand, the heart model give the rulers an extra layer or extra layers of protection if there were invading enemies from outside, right? The purpose of the wall and the gate are for protection, right? That's the original purpose for constructing city walls and gates. It's basically the fortification feature of a city. Right? Modern city does not need that anymore because modern military technique would make those walls and gates useless. But in the ancient time, defense, that's a major purpose of the wall. In the heart model, if the enemy invade from outside, then the ruler were protected within 2 additional layers of protection, of fortification. So that palace city is like the final keep in a castle. While in the head model, if there were outside invasion from outside, then the enemy could directly attack the area where the rulers and the elite stayed. On the other hand, if the threat is not from outside, if there is a civil kind of a riot or some kind of a uprising from within their own people, then the situation is totally opposite. If there is outside invasion, this one is better. The head model is in disadvantage. However, if there is a internal uprising, then in the heart model, the ruler was surrounded by their own people and became more endangered. While in the head model, the ruler have direct access to the outside and they can escape, avoid being surrounded by their, rioting people. In another word, the head model is usually adopted by rulers who, were kind of more afraid of their own people, more on guard. While the heart model usually indicate there is a better relationship between the rulers and the mass and their people. Again, this runs the risk of being too generalized and too simplified, but that's the logic behind these 2 different models. And indeed, the Tang Dynasty city was much more controlled. We know that each of those wars were walled and gated, and their gates were locked at dusk and open at dawn. So there were night curfew every day throughout the year in a highly controlled city of Chang'an during the Tang Dynasty. The Song Dynasty, on the other hand, is much more open. The capital city of Kaifeng, from the contemporary record, we read that all those streets were used as commercial space for trading, for business, and for commercial activities. We know that in the city of Chang'an, those big avenues were basically framed by walls that define those wars. The urban streets in Chang'an were not public spaces. They were just for communication, transportation in between those miniature cities. While in the city of Kaifeng, that was not the case. Their streets were lined with shop fronts, and we read those virtually all those major thoroughfares are busy commercial streets. And indeed, commercial life was so significant to the Song society that even some of the monasteries, some Buddhist temples became the center for commercial activity. And we read from the contemporary diaries, as well as notes kept by the scholars from the Song dynasty, and also the novels written during that period talk about the Buddhist monastery of Daxiangguo Si, and all kind of commercial activity happened around that monastery. There were not only market, but also brothel in that area. And the nightlife went on, deep into the night. And that is partially testified by a contemporary painting called the Qingming Festival on the River, which was painted in the late 11th century and early 12th century, just before the city was destroyed by the invading Jin army. In 1127, the city was destroyed by the rising power of the Jin Empire from the north, who just conquered the Liao Dynasty and invaded the Yellow River area of Song Dynasty and pushed their court to the Yangtze River area. Just before that destruction, the painting was created at that time. And it depicts from the suburb of Kaifeng to the area just inside the gate, a major gate. And it shows commercial life, not only in the urban thoroughfares, but also along those kind of more rural streets. It is a long hand scroll, and we are looking at the part of it. We find that those huge boats carried heavy goods, those cargo ships, and brought those merchandise into the city for that commercial life. And on the street, all kind of people doing all kinds of business along the street. There are small restaurants. People are seated under the roof, enjoying their food. And then on the street, just next to that very picturesque bridge, small vendors lay their merchandise on the ground and selling to the passengers. So we find scissors, knives, and all kind of tools lining there to be sold. And on the street, passengers, some of them shouldered goods as well. And under the bridge, a cargo ship is just about to pass that arch. And with the masts lowered already in order to pass, and the ship kind of was lowered, catching the water deep because of the heavy cargo, and exciting, bystanders were trying to give direction to that boat, just like today someone gave direction for a big truck to back up into a space, into a garage, for example. So it's very it looks very familiar, right? So the city in the Song dynasty looks familiar to us, while the Tang capital only, even just a few centuries before, looks very foreign. And that is because both the Song city and our modern city are basically commercial, while the Tang capital city was not. It's much more political and much more kind of controlled and with heavy kind of surveillance. Let's take a look at another detail of this painting depicting a city just before its destruction. Again, busy streets, cart pulled by an ox. So the street, instead of being framed by walls, it is framed by shop front, which makes the space part of the stage for commercial activity. And those previous images are still in the kind of a suburb and outside of the city. And this is the gate. And after this part of the scroll, we have a glimpse into the real urban space. So here, inside the gate, streets became wider and the architecture became bigger and more elegant. The thatched roof buildings disappeared and all the roofs are tiled. And we also started to see taller buildings. So again, kind of shop-fronted streets with all kind of commercial activity happening. And there are also like clinics. This is a little clinic. So it looks very familiar to us. We will find ourselves comfortable living in a city from the Song dynasty, but not a few centuries earlier from the Tang capital of Chang'an. That would look very uncomfortable and very foreign to us. So again, to just remind you the contrast between the walled walls in the city of Chang'an from Tang dynasty and the commercial street in the Song capital of Dongjing. And this is a different reconstruction of the capital city of Kaifeng. Dongjing means eastern capital, basically. It's the same city, but obviously the outline of the outer city looks a little bit different. That is because we don't really have scientific record about it, but we do know, and in both of these reconstruction drawings for the same city, it is a heart model with the palace city, the kind of inner city, and the outer city laid concentric. And the Chang'an city is, a head model. And then the city at large, right? Now let's move on to kind of the theme of the secularization of the religious architecture. We look at a few examples, and we will also look at the pagodas. So this is called the Jin Ci, or the Jin shrine. Ci means shrine, right? So Ci as an architectural type belong to the Confucian tradition, right? So in Confucianism, each family, each clan need to honor their ancestor with an altar displaying name tablet of deceased ancestors in each household. And as a clan, they need to have a shrine dedicated to their common ancestors. So shrine is a Confucian architectural type. The Jin Ci belong to an elite clan in the Song Dynasty who claim that their ancestor was one of the rulers from the Zhou Dynasty, and who was authorized to rule the Shanxi area as a royal prince. And so basically this clan claimed their ancestry to the royalty of the Zhou Dynasty, during the time of Confucius. So it has a huge shrine, family shrine. But this shrine, with the majority of buildings constructed in the Song Dynasty, featured a garden-like setting. It does not have that serious atmosphere of a religious architecture. It looks much more lively compared to the similar kind of building constructed in the Ming and the Qing Dynasty, for example. So it has a lot of trees and a river pass the center of the complex and intersecting the major north-south axis, which give it a very unique look. In addition to that, additional courtyards and buildings were not lined up symmetrically and exactly with the central axis. Rather, they were arranged more freely and with angles to each other, which work much better with the garden-like setting of the complex. And that is part of the kind of a secularized religious architecture. It highlights living environment, highlight the enjoyment of life rather than the solemnity and the seriousness of religious architecture. And indeed, the major platform in front of the central building, which was dedicated to the sage mother, the mother of the ruler, who was the ancestor of this clan, doubled as a stage for theatrical performance. That is also a theater, which again testifies its kind of secularized condition. And this is a general tendency in the Song period, from the 10th century to the 13th century. In general, temples, temples, monasteries, shrines, they all kind of doubled as entertaining space and commercial space. A lot of market developed around the temple area, as well as kind of entertainment, including Chinese theater, originated also from the religious setting, and that began in this period, from the Song period. The Chinese drama, Chinese theater, pretty much developed from this period. Also, from the performance on Buddhist story or Taoist story, and eventually more and more entertaining elements were added, and eventually it became a pure entertaining artistic form of theater. It came from theater itself, came from religious background, which is very similar to Greek theater as well. The Greek tragedy, Greek theater was also developed first, from religious ritual, from the religious background, about mythology, about Apollo, and eventually those performances became more and more just for their own purpose, no longer associated with the mythology, with religion, with worship anymore. So in China, that is also the case. Theater, come from religious ritual, and that began from the Song period. Now let's take a look at this building complex. This is a bird's eye view. You can see the water body, the main axis, the entrance, pavilions, and the Sage Mother's Hall. And on the side, there was the temple for Shu Yu, who was the male founder of the clan, and that is dedicated to his mother, according to the current belief. Well, there was scholarly debate about what precisely that sage mother was. But in general, today, the local people believe, these were the relationship, right? So this is the gate to the shrine of Shu Yu. As looking at that gate. That's the founder's shrine, and that's the mother of the founder, which is called the Sage Mother Hall, and that is the major building, while this one is on the side courtyard. So on the side courtyard, which does not frame the central axis exactly, added liveliness to the entire complex. Here we are looking at the central axis. We are looking at the entrance to the Sage Mother Hall and its platform for theatrical performance. From the other side, we are looking through the memorial archway, Pailo, and looking through the buildings standing in between, and the end of that, the axis is the Sage Mother's Hall, right? So that memorial archway called Paifang, right? So this is the so-called Sage Mother's Hall, and it features an open porch. And this building is built on the Song territory. Even though it belonged to the Yellow River area, it has that kind of sense of openness, contrasting the Liao, nearby buildings just slightly to the north, but built on the Liao territory. And this is the Sage Mother's Hall. And that space behind the porch was for theatrical performance. It's basically, a stage. And people could appreciate that from these unsheltered areas surrounding that stage. And this image also shows the bridge, which is kind of where the central axis intersect that water body, right? This is the Sage Mother's Hall, the plan of the Sage Mother's Hall. You can see the main building, statue of the Sage Mother in the middle, and surrounded by a porch from all sides, and the space in between the doors and this frontal porch, that is basically the stage for performance. And here we are looking at the porch, right? That space for performance. And the main hall behind it. So looking at the bridge, again, bridging that water just pass diagonally in the front of the Sage Mother's Hall. The Sage Mother's Hall features a double eave hip and gable roof. Right, so you can see clearly it's a double eave and hip and gable roof. It's not a pure hipped roof. There's a gable section, there's a hipped section, but double eave. And it's not a two-story building. Inside it's just one general space. The detail of the bridge and the water underneath. So the bridge also provide an interesting kind of audience for the theater appreciator. So they can stand on different locations during performance on this bridge. Kind of comfortable, especially during the hot and humid summer, with the cooling waters from underneath, creating that nice environment for appreciating theater in a garden-like setting. This is the Sage Mother, right? And some scholars believe this is a water goddess because of the water theme behind it. But the mainstream belief this is the mother of the Shuyu, the ancestor of the Jin family. Now, let's take a more detailed look at the Dule Monastery. Previously, we looked at it as an example having a pavilion located in the center on the Liao territory, right? So this is the Liao structure, and it's a Guanine Pavilion. Guanine Ge is very, very famous. It was discovered by Professor Liang Sicheng in the early 20th century. And it is built on the Liao territory from the 11th century, called Dule Si, the monastery of solitary pleasure or solitary happiness. So it's building the Guanyin Pavilion kind of unified 1, 2, and 3 in its structure. The interior, the core of the interior is just 1 story. So there we have 1. For the standing kind of tall statue of the Bodhisattva, a very beautiful piece of sculpture. From outside, it features 2 roofs, and these are actually 2 roofs. These are not a double eave, right? Because the interior are multi-story. So this is not just a roof style. This is actually, 2 different roofs. So from outside, it looks like it is a 2-story building because of the 2 sloping roofs. And there's a balcony from outside. And then the surrounding area, there are actually 3 stories. 3. You have 1 story, 1 story, 2 story, and 3 story. So the whole building had incorporated all the 3 numbers of 1, 2, and 3. And which had symbolic significance in Chinese philosophy as well as in Buddhist philosophy. 1 referred to the kind of the origin, which is 1 completeness. And in the famous Taoist classics, Dao De Jing, it says 1 gave birth to 2, 2 gave birth to 3, and 3 gave birth to myriad world, which means, in the origin, there's just 1. It's like the Big Bang that eventually, create everything. So that holds significance, and we don't know whether this incorporation of 1, 2, and 3 in this single building has anything to do with that philosophy, but this is the the factual part of its structure. So let's go through this monastery at the gate, looking at this is the gate, at the gate, looking at the Guanine Pavilion, and passing the gate on each side. These are very standardized Chinese Buddhist monastery plan. On either side, we have the guardian, protector deities. They are located on either side of this gate building, right? So this is the gate. In the 2-side base, there are Buddhist guardians. And so this picture gives you a sense of the scale. It's pretty big, from outside, it doesn't look that big, but actually they are pretty big. And under the eave of the gate, we are looking at the Guanyin Pavilion. From outside, looks like it's 2-story building. And by the way, to imagine a 11th century look of the building, you should imagine without those poles, without those supporting columns. The eaves protrude out very far from the wall. And, after many, many centuries, 1,000 years, they start sagging. So extra support needed to be provided, but those were not original, right? Originally, it is much more lively and open. So another look at the Guanyin Pavilion. So when you enter the gate, you just see the lower part of the goddess. And to see the face, you have to look up. And this is the image you get from the inside. You see the goddess looming above you. but you have a chance to look at her face to face, straight on, by going to the surrounding kind of circumambulation ambulatories, which were in 3 stories, right? So those 3-story surrounding space allow you to go to the middle section and look at the middle part of the body, and go to the upper level and look at the face of the bodhisattva directly. And this is what you see when you are on the 3rd floor, looking at the face of the bodhisattva using flashlight. Now, Longjingsi, we looked at this as an example of Song layout with the tall building in the back, right? We will also look at this very quickly, see how the individual buildings are laid out. This is the bodhisattva in that pavilion, right? Very similarly, from outside, it looks like it has more than 2 stories, many stories, but the inside is just 1 story, and then surrounded by multi-story corridors that allow you to appreciate the statue from different angle, from different level. Now let's look at a series of pagodas. Just to, I will highlight a few of them for the purpose of secularization. This is the famous Yunyan Pagoda from the 5 dynasties, right? And it is a masonry pagoda. It is constructed in the tower pavilion style. Its significance is primarily in its early age. And this is the Liuhe Pagoda, the pagoda of 6 harmony, constructed in the capital city of the Southern Song dynasty in the city of Hangzhou. And this pagoda is primarily for scenery enjoyment. It features grand interior space. It does not belong to any specific monastery. It was constructed by the river, and people go up there to get a vista, panorama vista of the beautiful river, and especially the tide, the famous tide of the river of the Zhe River or the Qiantang River. It's a different name for the same river, right? So it's secularization, right? So in the Song dynasty, a pagoda can be constructed without, especially toward the Southern Song period, even without relics. And in this case, there's no relics buried underneath this pagoda. So that's another sign of secularization. And this one is called the Liao Dita, constructed at the border of the Song and the Liao territory. And this is almost like a military watchtower. Liao Dita is basically for the local defending Song forces to go up there to observe the other side of the border, see if there is an unusual movement of military movement for their enemies. That's a secularization, right? This is a very beautiful pagoda, but this one is from the Liao territory. This one belonged to a real monastery, all right? In general, in the Liao territory, things are more conservative. Secularization happened in a slower kind of a pace. This is another pagoda, also from the Liao territory. And the pagoda, our old friend, the Wooden Pagoda, we encountered this building many times now from the Fogongsi. This is probably the most famous Chinese pagoda, constructed in pure wood. It is a 5-story pagoda, and each story has a balcony, northern style with gentle eave horizontal eave, very slight curve compared to the southern style. And the interior feature a core and a surrounding corridor. In the center, statues are staged and people circumambulate on the surrounding corridor to appreciate different statues. Like in the Guanine Pavilion, we circumambulate the same statue, but here there are actual 5 different stories, and each story you can circumambulate by looking at different 5 different groups of Buddha statues, right? And this gives me a sense of the scale. This is the corridor. The width of the corridor is pretty big. And looking at the central statues are in the center. It's a huge wooden, pure wooden structure. And that guy is me, by the way, almost 30 years ago. And the pagoda dominate the entire city, looming in the background. And again, that guy is me. So I think, okay, yeah, we look at this in terms of pagoda-centered plan, but as individual architecture, it features complicated brackets, and we will come back to it to look at the brackets in the next lecture. So this is obviously a very important example of architecture. Bracket on the facade. So the whole pagoda is praised as a museum of brackets because there are all kind of brackets displayed there. And inside the central statue of a Buddha located in the center to be circumambulated.